Our Comic Hour with your hosts, Andrew Bonner
and Chris Ramos.
And tonight we are covering the infamous Usagi Yojimbo series. Not the entire series, but just one volume. And we're so excited to present this
Saga Volume 1.
Saga Volume 1.
Is that what we should say?
Yes.
There's a lot of Volume 1s, just in case you want to know.
Right. And this is a really unique series in that we haven't really touched on this part of comics quite yet, but it's a very unique and very cartoon-based series, but it's really well regarded as one of the best ongoing series.
Yeah, or longest. Stan's been for over 30 years. This was written,
about since 1984, and so. It's really interesting series, and if you've probably seen the image at some point, if you're looking at a bookshelf, you're out in a store, comic book store or whatnot, it is a samurai rabbit and his incredible adventures.
And his top knot is his ears.
Yep.
And it's wrapped, and then he has a scar over his left eye.
Yep.
Which isn't really addressed in this volume very much, but it's kind of fun because it looks like an eyebrow almost.
Right.
It's a scar.
And then he usually has a blue gi.
Yes.
And he's
double swords.
Yes.
2 swords. Yes.
And so he is known as a rabbit, Ronin. And so he isn't really held by laws or anything, but he's kind of a law binding. He's not part of a police force or the government, but he's trying to help make sure there's good in the world.
His Bushido code.
It's Bushido code.
That's what it is.
Yes.
And actually, it's funny because, we're just... The big elephant in the room is, yes, this is Usagi Yojimbo from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cartoon. And if you grew up watching the cartoon,
right, when
he appeared, it was a shift in the type of characters. Because he was Splinter was this aged, wise rat that trained the Ninja Turtles. And the Ninja Turtles were just crazy, right?
Yes.
But Usagi was one of those. He was a samurai, and he was real gentle, but he was a
gently fierce
fighter.
Oh,
yeah,
right.
He was really good.
So for that reference, he was in the episodes 32 and 34 of the third season of the 1987 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Yes.
And then he appeared in episodes 23 and 26 of the second season, the 2003 series. And he's kind of been part of their history and lore as kind of a supporting character that would come in and be a special guest in the series.
He was super popular when he came out.
Which makes sense because they're all ninjas and he's a samurai.
Yeah.
And it just the flow kind of goes well. Mm-hmm. And he really kind of is a great foil for the Turtles as well. He's a little more stoic, and yet he's pretty fierce and can kind of be lighthearted at the same time. So it kind of balances out the Turtles.
Well, it's good to see that the writing in this comic series is reflecting all of those first ideas and images that people had.
Yes.
And Stan has written this long run. He could write it forever. These stories, really, you can keep plucking stories from the day-to-day activities of a Ronin,
right?
And then just kind of okay, how about we have them run into this person, or how about we have them cover this ground, or travel this area?
And so Stan Sakai is the writer and the artist, I believe, of the series. Yep. And it was, when you look at it, the insides for the first time, you're like, oh, this is a manga. He was influenced by manga and Japanese culture, but it reads like an American comic from left to right, whereas manga reads from right to left. And so I thought that was kind of interesting because he could have made this like a traditional manga in every sense, but maybe it was his upbringing, maybe it was just everybody there. He was influenced around by all these things, but he still wanted to do his own thing. It's kind of interesting how that kind of came up, but it was the 80s. There was so many ideas in the world of Vertigo and Watchmen, Dark Knight Returns. This stuff was still going on too, and it kind of started underground as just part of an anthropomorphic series, and it kind of got flushed out over time. People kind of bought into it and really wanted to invest in this character.
Where was it first It was, so when it first came out, obviously people
Albedo Anthropomorphics in 1984.
And so the character was published before he appeared in the Ninja Turtles.
Yes, correct. And that was by later in like Fantagraphics. He would be in like an anthology series of like other characters that were appearing, and he kind of threw that in as his hat, and it just kind of kept evolving. And then he would go to Mirage Comics, where that's where Peter Laird and
Eastman and
Laird, that was their company, was like Mirage. They were over in that point. So that makes sense where they kind of crossed paths.
Yeah, they're probably like, hey, listen, we're going to draw turtles that act like humans. Yeah. And he said, wait, I already have a rabbit that walks like a humanoid.
And they're both anthropomorphic figures and characters.
In their own world, though. So like, Usagi absolutely came over, if I remember correctly, which I'm tapping into my childhood here.
Whoa.
I think he came over in like a portal or a dimension thing.
Oh, yes.
He's not, this isn't Earth.
Yes, because that's the first story is Shades of Green, and they like cross dimensions.
Yeah, so this isn't Earth. It's the Ninja Turtles are on Earth. But he was along with quite a few other.
They even had multiverse in that day. You know, everybody was doing multiverse. Here. Yeah, Crisis on Infinite Earth. You know what? We'll do our own. We're doing our own multiverse thing.
The rabbits and the dogs and the wolves and everything else that's here.
Yes.
You know, the cool thing about it, you know, again, when you start reading it, you have to immediately, just like when we were talking about Mouse and when we were talking about
Black Sad,
you have to put yourself in, I think, one of two camps. One is like, I'm going to read this, and then these are just what the characters look like, right?
Yes.
And the other one is, I'm going to recognize that this is an animal world, but I'm also going to read the story and see if I can break out of this animal world idea based on the power of the writing. Right.
Yeah, I'm thinking probably like between the two camps.
Yeah, it's like it's the same as if you're going to watch a cartoon, but it had really good writing. You're like, you kind of lose that it's a cartoon, which is, I think, a good goal, right? But with Usagi and his travels, there's so many characters that you meet that are other animals, and I think it's just like there's still. Why people like Stan's artwork is because it just flows so well, and the action is quick, right?
Right.
And it's
kind
easy.
of, and he's kind of inspired by like manga. Manga is very fast reading, or in most cases, very fast reading. You're trying to get to the point of the story, but also like absorbing the scene, the characters, trying to figure out the motivations for what the story is going for. I think that's really kind of said well in Stan Sakai's like writing, is that it's not too bogged down by a lot of continuity. It's bogged down. It's really inspired by what's the character doing, what's the point of the story, how is Usagi Yojimbo interacting with the world, and trying to carry out. I think it does it really well. And the beauty of all these stories was you can jump on anywhere.
Yeah,
that was one of the highlights that really, I think, drew people to the series. Is you can jump on anywhere at any point. It's very accessible.
And just him being like a houseless samurai, you know, so to speak.
Right, yeah.
Him just being a wandering, you know, helper. I think that loosens up the story a lot.
Yes.
So you don't feel like he's dependent on any one character. He's just wandering through the land, and he's helping where he can, and he's learning about himself and everything else.
Sure.
But he's still, I love when they show scenes where he's like meditating, or like where he is hitting people with his sword still in their scabbards, you know?
Right.
Because he's just like, I'm not going to, you know, really kill you or hurt you.
No.
Because that's not what I need to do. And then once someone pulls a regular knife, then he pulls his sword, right?
Right. Yeah.
So he matches
there was the one story, I think the duel, where they antagonize him, like, fight me.
Yeah.
You're this really established warrior. You know, everybody knows you, but I really want to test your skills, see if you're worth it. And he's like, no, I'm that's not really what I am. I'm not that aggressive. I'm not really out trying to be a hero. I'm just kind of doing my own thing. He's very modest in that way.
And I do like in this too that while you get a little origin story, you just sort of just
Yes,
jump right in. And it's like, this
exactly.
is Saga 1, this is the book 1,
Yes,
but they're like, hey, things happened before this book, and
right.
here's a really catch up quick, like boom, 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 that happened. Okay. You
Yeah,
know?
absolutely. And just to clarify for the audience, so the Usagi Yojimbo Saga One book covers issues 1 through 16 of the Mirage Publishing comic book series, Usagi Yojimbo Volume 2, and of issues 1 through 6 Dark Horse. So it's like majority of it is like the first Mirage years, 16 issues, and then like the first 6 issues of Dark Horse, and it's kind of like a best of a little bit, kind of a compilation of some of the stories. So there's tons of ways to jump into Saga Jumbo. You could start with at many different points, and this was just a point that we saw it on digital, and we're like, hey, let's pick that one.
You don't have to go back and watch the original Ninja Turtles cartoon.
No, absolutely.
And actually, this character is leaps and bounds past what that character was on that cartoon. I mean,
Okay.
this story is really, really different from what you felt like on the cartoon. Because the cartoon, they had to make him like marketable, and they had to make him like match the energy of the show.
Okay.
And I don't think he got a lot of.
At least they had a lot of source material to pick from.
Yeah. But I mean, he didn't really get a lot of like screen time, so to speak, right?
Sure, because he's still a minor character.
Yeah. So now you've got this entire story, and almost, I mean, every page he's on it pretty much.
Yeah.
I do like that it was split into 3 different parts, so to speak. One sort of his early days.
Yep.
And each story is like 10 pages or something. Or
yeah, 10 to 20, I would say. Kind of average of a book, unless there was something. I think it starts like the earlier stories kind of are shorter. And then as he kept progressing, the stories would get more complex and evolve.
Or you do like part 1 or part 2.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would say my favorite story on the first block, which is the first block.
Yeah, I like how they section out into like arcs.
Yes.
And then like, because the chapters or the issues, they really like flow well together, so you could see it as like a continuing story.
Yeah, they match his age.
Yeah.
And sort of his skill, and then also like what's happening in the world.
Yes, absolutely.
The first part, I guess, part 1 is called Shades of Death. Part 2 is called Daisho, which means 2 swords.
Yeah.
And that was his
and then the brink of life and death.
Yeah, it's very, very epic.
Whoa.
Very epic titles.
Yeah.
But my favorite story in the part 1 was Autumn. I thought that was cool.
Okay.
That was a good one.
Yeah, Battlefield. Well, I mean, Shades of Green was like really top tier. It really hooks you in.
That was a great start.
Great start.
There's one before it though, right?
Maybe the origin tale, the little short origin tale, which is cool. But I was like, wow, you're seeing all these interactions. And also like starting off with the turtle story, it gives you something as like the nostalgia of I know what the turtles are, and then introducing you to a new character as Usagi, and seeing kind of how they mash up and giving you best of both worlds, I think.
Well, and it kind of hooks you to that humanoid thing,
right?
Like animal humanoid idea, so that you don't. Because I mean, if you're accepting of the Ninja Turtles, then you'll jump right into. It's okay. You just jump right into this. There are no humans, but there is a human and other things. And
sure.
So the one who gave him his scar over his eye, is it Hijaki?
That could be.
But anyway, he was a human. So then I saw that Stan had made a comment saying that he had some backstory to this.
Oh, okay.
Of like what he was going to do, and he said it was going to be many volumes, like 12 or 15 volumes.
Wow.
And he was going to talk about how this world started with humans everywhere, and then started evolving into humanoids.
Oh, wow, that would have been really
anthropomorphic,
a different direction.
Now that's kind of why everyone is here, because some of them look way more human than others.
Correct.
And I just think, I don't know, I kind of like that backstory would be pretty involved, but I think that would ground it too much in like humanity. And I really like
there are some, I would say you're right. There's some more some stories. I think one of my favorites in that beginning was Battlefield. Like he really kind of teaches that like, fighting going off to war is not all fun. It's cracked up to me at a young age, why it's like a mature thing, how people like learn their lesson from it and why it's a bad thing in the first place. So I felt that story was really well written, and I was like, wow, okay, this book actually has really like Stan Sakai is really trying to tell us something.
I like, yeah, I mean that one's good too, because it's like all of these are lessons that you could translate into your own life too.
Yes.
And that's also the endearing quality of this.
Mm-hmm.
The story Autumn that I liked was a young Usagi walking around, and he falls into a trap, and he's trapped in a cage.
Yeah.
And there's like a
right.
monster,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like a monster wolf.
Yeah.
And in another cage was a girl that was captured.
Mm-hmm.
So Usagi breaks free from his cage, goes and saves her, and turns out she's like a powerful, immortal autumn goddess.
Yeah,
And
like
she brings,
elemental. Yeah.
she brings the changes of the
Yep.
seasons, kind of thing. And he kind of learns like that there's lots of other powers out there, like real elemental powers that he doesn't really know about.
Kind of respecting of like the nature of things.
Yeah, and then she sort of turns into autumn leaves, and he was like, wow, look at the leaves this year, they're especially colorful. It was just a really nice little story. And then I noticed in the next few issues, every once in a while there's some autumn leaves blowing around, kind of things. It's like, oh, that's kind of cool that they're tying it all together.
And then the funny one from that one is, or I think it's one of the lizard stories that they did. It might have been, what was it? The Lizard's Tale. Yeah. Lizard's Tale was just funny and lighthearted.
Yeah.
And the way Stan Sakai draws lizards is just funny to me. Just because not that they don't have enough detail, but like out of all the characters and things, like they're just kind of like the run-of-the-mill animals, they're kind of goofy looking, and it's meant to just kind of, I think, break up all that seriousness too.
Yeah, they're like baby
and do
dinosaurs.
Some world building in between. Yeah, it's kind of like baby dinosaurs in the world. Absolutely.
And the funny thing is, when he draws characters normally, they're usually pretty like serious. They just sort of look like they're thinking about stuff. Yeah. But then every once in a while they get goofy and like start screaming and running around. And you see people's,
and that's
like,
where I think the
faces.
Cartooning incarnate comes from.
It's really fun. Like, and it kind of breaks you up and like, oh yeah, this is actually a fun world. It's not just like a really scary world, like Mouse or something.
Yes. And I guess this is a good segment to like segue into that. How would you describe for our listeners what the art style is of Usagi Yojimbo? If they're looking at the black and white, we'll start with black and white.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm going to search out some other volumes too, including the colorized one. I just want to kind of see what that looks like.
Sure.
But I do think that the art, I mean, first of all, his line work is great.
Right.
I mean, a lot of people love it because it's
like top tier.
Yeah. And it's very clean. And when he wants texture or he wants a difference in front and back,
he'll black it out, and he'll like do that. Especially like when he's doing ninjas, he'll do like ninjas in black, and then he'll do some white outline, and then he'll like add more detail to the background.
Yeah, and it's usually just enough.
Like, I love his paneling.
Too credit.
His paneling is really good in that you really focus on like what character what's being narrated, and there's not a lot of there's some dialogue in some points, but if he's like he has this ninja scene, like he really wants to illustrate the scene and really like where's the story going and what characters are we dealing with.
Yeah, and I did notice too that his like heroic figures, his lead figures, the ones who are like the samurais and the senseis and the master, and that they're drawn pretty simply, like they're just sort of just clean looking, right? But then some of the villains, they're all like gnarly and they have a lot more lines on them and they have a lot more like hair and damage and texture.
You're right, yeah, because they have some different hairstyles to them.
Eyes are always
or they
like
weird. He does like facial hair for some of them.
Yeah. You never see that. You never see like their heroes getting scruffy. and their clothes are always kind of clean and organized.
Yeah, that's good detail. Yeah, because Usagi himself doesn't have any.
No, he always seems like, I mean, even his
clean cut for
face.
a rabbit.
Yeah. I mean, his face doesn't have much texture to it.
No,
Right. So
right. Because he really wants to, like, here he is, here's his
his
gi,
expressions.
his expressions. Yeah. So I think that's a really good thing that Stan Sakai does well in his art is expressions. Like, you definitely can tell if they're angry, frustrated, sad,
Or if they're hurt. Like if they get stabbed, they're always like, it's like a big moment.
Scared.
You know?
Like, he can do that, or like surprised and shock. I think that's one of the things he really excels in.
And that goes back to that manga stuff, is like when there's violence, the whole page erupts.
Right.
It's like they make a huge deal out of like just the whole act of drawing your sword.
Sure.
Like that's you've now escalated it to that level.
Yeah. There was only some scenes that when you get, maybe depending on like if there wasn't enough like outline or texture, but some of them, if he didn't put enough of that, it would kind of blend together. It was hard to pick out which character it is.
Or if there's a lot of
when
black.
he's doing like, so sometimes it would get a little washed out, but that happened very few times in the overall like scheme of the book. So I mean, otherwise it's pretty easy to like kind of go through it and really understand the scene or what emotions he's trying to bring out. Yeah, that was my only critique of it. It was just sometimes it would be almost too much.
And did you, I mean, I guess if there was, I didn't notice, but did you notice if there was any other rabbits?
No, I don't think so.
I think he's the only rabbit.
Yeah, which one makes sense. I mean, he was a lot of foxes. I mean, obviously we had the turtles,
like weird panda bear kind of things,
panda bear kind of things. Yeah, absolutely more bear, like or like maybe like a hyena of some sort.
Or some are, again, largely human, and then they just have like a weird animal ears.
Yeah, or like maybe like a pig or goat or something like that.
I think one of the really fun parts of it too is just that while the story is progressing, you can see that Usagi is getting wiser. Like he's learning his not lessons.
As naive and
and he's able to spot like evil quicker. Right. So he has like a better sort of sixth sense to himself.
Sure.
And I think on top of it all, when you're reading through it, it's good to pause at each one of the stories and just kind of think of like, okay, was that, it's almost like a fable. There's always like an underlying
that was another
anthropomorphic. Yes, that's right. Oh my gosh.
See, we did them all. We're trying to do them all.
We've done every anthropomorphic comic book. We read it. It's just like our thing now. And we just compare them all. We just see. But yeah, they 100% are like developing me as a character, and I think that's really neat to see. Especially, this is just volume 1, and
we're just scratching the surface.
There's collected editions and everything else.
We looked up, there was 39 volumes altogether.
Yeah, but those were like independent volumes, and then they've combined them, but still into 10 books or 12 book series.
It's crazy.
And it just goes to say too that Usagi Yojimbo, his name, the Usagi part means rabbit in Japanese, and then Yojimbo is bodyguard. So his title that everyone just picked up on is just rabbit bodyguard, but his real name is Muramatsu.
So he was based on Miyamoto Musashi. He was kind of a famous samurai, and also if you just look up Usagi Yojimbo, he's very much based on referencing like Akira Kurosawa, and that was like a lot of famous like Japanese films, a lot of samurai films, very influenced by Lone Wolf and Cub, and just a lot, and kind of a lot of the Japanese cinema, kind of from like the 50s, 60s, and all the way to the 80s. He was very influenced by what he was kind of seeing and looking at.
Well, and that's their version of the wandering sheriff or the wandering cowboy. The wandering Ronin, just doing good from city to city, village to village, and it's still the time of Japan, I suppose, where you could say is the time that they're feuding and that they're all different feudal lords and they have their own lands and no one's really united. There's no emperor,
Right.
so they all have these separate provinces.
Which make for great storylines.
Yeah.
Great storylines. There was a lot of interesting developments, great writers at that time. So he was very inspired by like, wow, that's really a great sentiment. How can I use what I'm seeing on the film to adapt it to my series, but also being inspired by his own ideas. So I think he was just influenced by the culture that was kind of going on around. So really interesting. Like,
what do you think of the female ninja?
The female ninja was cool, and it kind of gets into a great foil for him. It kind of helps balance it out. I really liked, what was it? There was once what was it? I just got to it because this is a really long volume, really long saga. I just finished. What was it? The Daishio story.
Oh yeah,
Daishio, like the slavers, Daishio, the mongrels, and like he honestly, when you think of your hero, it's very hard to challenge them. Kind of like Superman. How do you keep challenging him? And so when he gets captured and his swords get ripped away by this general in the story, there's actually real stakes for him.
And all he can think about is he's just like, I want my swords.
Right. And you find out, yeah, because like they kind of do a little backstory of like the swords he got from his sensei, or like the sword forger that was like symbolic of his soul. So it was kind of reclaiming his soul in order to get that. And I thought that was a really powerful, well done story.
Yep.
Different portrayal of double crosses. And after like saving this village and whatnot, he's like, maybe he could have let that go. In some series that might have happened, but this one he's like, I need to reclaim my swords because that means so much to him as a character to do that.
Well, and then in that backstory too, other samurai, other people were trying to get the swords to battle,
yes.
And the sword maker said, no, I'm not going to sell them to you. So he
yeah.
kept them for people who really honored the blade, and that was like what he was looking for. And so Usagi's samurai instructor, that's where he got those blades from, because he was, as a child, ready to honor the blade.
And that's such cool really character neat. Development. Yeah, you don't really see neat. That a lot. And I mean, that just like reinforces the recognition of how cool this character was and how cool this like storyline and just series was, just to see like that character develop, as well as like those times where you can do a little flashback story of how he got his swords, how did he learn to be a samurai and the code of the Bushido and all that.
Well, and that he gave it time to develop too.
Yes,
it wasn't just
you didn't rush it.
Yeah, and because there's like a part 1 and a part 2, and I'm sure it comes up later in the series on and off about the symbolism of his swords and the symbolism of just him. I also like his sword. Occasionally, when they try to get into a door or something that's locked, he like unlocks his handle.
Oh yeah, because he has like, a lockpick.
Yeah, there's like lockpicks in his handle of his sword.
I was like, oh, that's kind of a cool writing device. Like, you can use that.
Just get that
right.
So as long as he has his sword, he kind of can still like break in places, get places.
Absolutely.
And it shows he could do a little MacGyver every once in a while. Right. He figures it out.
Yeah.
He doesn't usually just bust in and start hacking.
And another thing, he's always like helping like the supporting character if he's like a young aspiring warrior, or he, he's like the son of the village elder. Like he'll help him out, kind of guide him through it. He isn't like totally like, I won't take any money, but because also he has to eat. So he kind of also brings that up. He's at like others at the end of that Daishio story, after like the general is gone. He's like, hey, there was a reward, hey, I'm not going to take the reward for the general. I said I wouldn't do that. But his other, guys, we have to, we got to eat too. So they kind of split off the bounty. And so it was just interesting, like nuances to that. I was like, yeah, that's kind of cool. All right. But really interesting storylines. Like they're never really quite the same.
Yeah. And then there's parts, I mean,
similarities maybe.
As Usagi's developing and becoming more mature.
Yes.
Like the stories are becoming more mature.
Absolutely.
And there were a few that I thought were, not getting graphic, but they were like, where they're driving spears into people and like,
sure.
The the female ninja is like, after she stabs someone, she like flicks their blood back on them, like, and it's just the little things, right? But
sure, it's different detail, and also it
yeah.
sets her apart from him to contrast.
Well, and by that time you've grown to really like these characters, and you
Right.
have I think Stan does that really well. He gets like a good vested interest in those characters so that
Yes.
you really do care about what's happening to them, and like you can see just a little bit of that cartoon like
Right.
sadness, like you're
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, actually that's pretty sad.
Yeah, or like when his like sensei gets like killed, I was like, oh,
Yeah.
yeah. But man, great series. I had a great time reading it. And this was the first time, I think this was both of us the first time reading this
Yeah.
material. And it was one of those things like this is still regarded as one of like the great ongoing comic series of ranks up there in the greats.
Well, and to have it by one guy and just sort of hold that
Yeah,
true, it
absolutely. Yeah,
helps.
right.
It helps for you as the reader, you can pick up on that you know that it's becoming a passion project and always was.
Right.
And that's really good to feel as a comic book reader, that the writer and the artist are, if they're not the same person, then that the writer and artist are in the same page, and that they're, being true to the source material. I think it's what everyone wants out of their comics, to just have the people take it seriously. That's it. Just take it seriously. Do your
Right.
job the best job you can.
Right. Yeah, and it ended up I guess so far in its long running continuing, um, it's received 10 Eisner Awards and over 20
Oh
nominations.
my gosh.
Like he's gotten Best Letterer, talent award for talent deserving of wider recognition, Best Serialized Story, lots of lettering awards, Best Continuing Series, like the Japanese American National Museum in Los Angeles held an exhibit for You're the Rabbit, which that's awesome to hear since Sakai's Usagi Yojimbo. So that's cool. And, he's getting the recognition he deserves, and he puts in the work to keep that going for, nearly 30 years.
Yeah.
That's
Over.
insane.
I
Over,
mean,
yeah. That's insane.
and he is
That's all.
also just, I think, bringing a lot of attention to the samurai code, and he's
Yeah,
bringing a lot of attention
because that
to
could get lost,
how they wear their, all of their clothing, the way their houses are built, the way that their shoes are, and
Right. It
the
keeps
way they
it pretty
respect each
authentic
other.
to the
Yeah,
culture
that's what I thought.
itself. Yeah.
And I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of these, because I mean, if you look at the costumes and the outfits and stuff, I mean, they're all pretty unique.
Yes.
But I wouldn't be surprised if some of those monsters that he was fighting, like
Yeah.
the one was like a tiger with a snake tail, and I wouldn't be surprised if that was
like
an
connected
actual
to like culture and the
mythological.
lore,
Yep.
mythology.
Yep. I
Right.
bet that's really where he's pulling that from, instead of trying to just make something else.
Right.
That's always refreshing to see.
Yeah.
Also, so I give him props for that.
Exactly. And recently they received a Netflix series, so it is on Netflix, which is cool. They're finding different outlets for him and still giving you Usagi Yojimbo, that recognition, and seeing if you can stand alone. It's called The Samurai Rabbit: The Usagi Chronicles, and it came out in 2020. So definitely look it out. I would be interested now reading some of the material to go try to watch it.
Yeah.
See if it translates over well. And I definitely still want to go look up those Ninja Turtle episodes because I haven't seen those yet. So that sounds like a lot of fun. Heck yeah. Overall, what'd you think of reading this material?
Well, I think it's well done. Yes, it gets a lot of hype. There's a lot of collectors and just comic enthusiasts who are just really jazzed about it. I think it's because it's so far out of the mainstream that it's just refreshing to read on one aspect. But the other hand, I would say if the main goal is to just have a good time reading it and then want to read more, 10 out of 10 for that stuff. It's like, yeah, you want to find the next volume, because it's a read that you can sit down at night and just say, you know what, I'm going to knock out a few of these stories.
Exactly.
And then think about them, and you don't have to worry about 20 years of backstory.
Right. It's not like when you're reading Spider-Man or Batman, you have to know something that previously happened or who's writing the arc. It's not so dependent on that.
And the characters are so unique that you are not confused about who is the, who's the good guy, who's the bad guy kind of thing.
Absolutely.
And
definitely there's a starting point, and some like, the story carries on a little bit in between just to kind of like transition the story, but you can jump on anywhere.
And it doesn't feel dated either.
No.
If you think about it.
No, absolutely. Especially if you like the underground stuff or you like black and white comics. There's some both. There's a black and white, and then he did color. I don't know if he colored this series himself or somebody else did.
That's what I was looking at in the back. They've got a few color extras, and I mean, he's got his name signed at the bottom, so maybe he did. I don't.
Yeah.
Oh, never mind.
Oh, colors by Tom
Luth.
Yeah.
Oh, never mind.
But you know what? Like, even just kind of, this is our first kind of gut reactions to the color version, and I mean, it looks pretty right. It's not too jarring. It kind of bounces out. I don't know if I would jump into the colors right away.
Yeah, it takes away from just the respect you have for him
line
as an
work
illustrator,
and an artist. Yeah.
You kind of lose a lot of that, but that's what happens when you color work. You lose that initial thought process a little bit.
Sure.
And I think a colored one would read slower. I think that's also a disadvantage.
Could be,
Your eyes are absorbing more, and you just want to get through the page, not just the story. So
right, that's an interesting perspective. Yeah, absolutely. I enjoy this series too, as like first time reading material and kind of always hearing about it and any discussions of like the greatest graphic novels, storylines, things like that. And finally reading it, I'm like, oh, like this is really good. It flows really well. It's easy to get into. Great character development. And they really tell some interesting stories that have some meaning to it. It's not just some, kind of here, there, action, fight, somebody dies.
Yeah, right.
It has some depth to it. And if you can do that while still having a great interactive story, that's awesome. Paneling's great.
You can see he's having a good time.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, I would definitely recommend it to and readers of any level, if you're just looking for something as just a refresher or just something to palate cleanser, I think we called it.
Well, and don't be surprised. There are some really nice volumes out there. Some like new hardcover.
Yeah,
colors.
Exactly.
They're super expensive, but you can find these in just trades. You can find them at your library, I'm sure.
Right. Reread this on Hoopla.
Yeah, you can read them digitally. They're pretty accessible, and you know what? Get a smaller trade that's just the black and white and just try it out.
Yeah.
A lot of people want that collector's edition, and the really
we were looking up. It was the Grass Cutter Artist Edition.
Yeah,
that IDW.
It's very nice.
So that's who's currently publishing stories. It went from Dark Horse to Usagi, or not Dark Horse to IDW, and so that's currently who has the rights to it right now. But I mean, this character's been or like the Fangraphics, Mirage. Yeah, Dark Horse and IDW. So he's kind of been a little bit of everywhere.
He's been around.
Except for mainstream. But awesome series, and we definitely recommend you checking it out. Now, this has been another great episode of Bam Pow Comic Hour. This is Andrew Garner
and Chris Ramos
signing off.
Goodbye.